Welcome back to the Crypto Intellect, the channel where we cut through the noise, follow the data, and look at what is really happening behind the scenes in crypto. Today's XRP news is bigger than just another headline, because the Clarity Act timeline has now turned into a real countdown. Galaxy Research has reportedly cut the odds of passage to around 50%, prediction markets are pricing it even lower, and across the Atlantic, Europe is preparing for a massive regulatory shakeout where most crypto companies may not be allowed to operate unless they meet licensing rules. So when you put these pieces together, one thing becomes clear. This is no longer just about politics, and it is no longer just about waiting for another vote. This is about structure, survival, and which projects are actually ready for the next phase of digital finance. The most important part is this. The Senate is away until July 13th, and that means staff members, lawmakers, administration officials, and industry players have a very small window to fix the remaining problems before the bill moves into the next stage. Senate leadership has made it clear that July is the target, but the path is tight. There are still unresolved issues around ethics, illicit finance, developer protections, and how much power regulators should have over digital asset platforms. If you are holding XRP through all of this uncertainty, you need to understand what is really happening. This is not financial advice, and this content is only for educational and informational purposes. Always do your own research before making any financial decision, but pay close attention, because most people are missing the real mechanism inside this bill. Just a few weeks ago, the Clarity Act looked like it had strong momentum. It had already passed important stages, it had bipartisan support, and many people believed the United States was finally moving toward real digital asset rules. But then, the political pressure started building. The ethics agreement became a major sticking point, and suddenly, the odds started falling. Galaxy Research reportedly moved its expectations lower, and prediction markets followed. That matters because markets do not only react to hope, they react to timing, votes, and risk. The bill needs 60 votes in the Senate, and that means Republicans alone are not enough. Democrats have to come across the aisle, and right now, many of them want stronger language around public officials, conflicts of interest, and crypto businesses connected to political power. This is where the 60-vote math becomes extremely important. Even if every Republican supported the bill, which is never guaranteed, the Clarity Act would still need Democratic votes to clear the Senate. And if even 2 or 3 Republicans break away, the number of Democrats needed becomes even higher. That is why the ethics framework is not just some side issue. It could decide whether the bill passes or fails. Democrats want rules that prevent political figures from using public power while benefiting from crypto-related businesses. Republicans want to move the bill forward without turning it into a political battlefield. And sitting in the middle of all this is the crypto industry, waiting to see whether America finally gives the market clear rules or delays everything again. But the hidden part, the part most channels are barely talking about, is Section 604. This section is critical because it deals with developer protections and the line between centralized systems and truly decentralized systems. In simple words, the bill tries to say who should be regulated and who should not. If a platform is centralized, it has obligations. If a platform only pretends to be decentralized but still has control points, it also has obligations. But if a system is truly decentralized, developers should not be treated the same way as centralized financial companies. That sounds simple, but in practice, this language could decide whether builders come to the United States or leave for countries that already have clearer rules. Law enforcement groups are worried about this section because they believe the current language could make it harder to investigate crime on-chain. They want stronger tools to go after bad actors, money laundering, fraud, and illicit finance. That concern is serious. But there is another side to the story. If developer protections become too weak, honest builders may feel like they are taking legal risk just by creating open-source tools or decentralized infrastructure. And if that happens, the United States could push talent away instead of attracting it. That is why Section 604 is so powerful. It is not just legal wording. It is the difference between building the future inside America or watching that future move overseas. Now look at what Europe is doing. Europe has already moved forward with a much clearer regulatory framework, and the result is brutal but revealing. Companies that prepared early, built compliance systems, and got licensed are still standing. Companies that operated in gray areas are now facing pressure, delays, or shutdown risk. That is why the number everyone should be watching is not just the Clarity Act odds. It is the 83% figure. If only a small percentage of firms are ready for the new rules, then the majority of the market gets filtered out. This is not just regulation. This is a purge of weak infrastructure, unlicensed operators, and companies that thought the gray area would last forever. For XRP holders, this matters because XRP's long-term story has always been connected to compliant infrastructure, payments, settlement, liquidity, and institutional adoption. Regulatory clarity does not magically guarantee price movement, and nobody should pretend it does. But clarity does something even more important. It decides who can operate, who can scale, and who survives when the market becomes more serious. In every major financial shift, the winners are usually the players that prepared before the rules were fully enforced. Banks, payment companies, licensed exchanges, and regulated infrastructure providers do not wait until the last second. They build early, they get approvals, and they position themselves before the crowd understands what is happening. That is why this moment feels so important. The Clarity Act may not create the infrastructure overnight, because much of that infrastructure is already being built. What the bill could do is validate the companies and networks that have already spent years preparing for a regulated future. The market is not waiting for retail excitement. It is waiting for permission, structure, and clear legal lanes. Once those lanes exist, the companies that already built compliant systems can move faster, while weaker players face pressure. This is the real story behind the headlines. It is not just about whether XRP moves today or tomorrow. It is about whether the system XRP is connected to becomes part of the regulated financial future. And this is why the Senate recess matters so much. While senators are away, the work does not stop. Staff members are still negotiating. Committees are still trying to align language. Industry groups are still pushing for changes. Law enforcement groups are still raising concerns. And lawmakers are trying to solve the ethics issue before the July window closes. Once the Senate returns, the conversation changes from negotiation to procedure. That means floor timing, amendments, votes, and political pressure. If the defense bill takes priority first, the Clarity Act gets pushed into an even tighter schedule. And if the window before summer recess closes, the timeline becomes much more uncertain. The House Financial Services Committee hearing scheduled for July 17th also matters because hearings shape the narrative. It may not be a final vote, but it gives lawmakers and industry leaders a platform to explain why the bill matters. That kind of public pressure can influence senators, especially when the crypto industry is arguing that the United States is falling behind Europe, Asia, and other regions. Japan is moving. South Korea is moving. Australia is moving. Parts of Africa are moving. Europe has already created its framework. Meanwhile, the United States has spent years debating definitions, jurisdiction, enforcement, and which agency controls what. At some point, delay itself becomes a decision. The bigger picture is simple. The Clarity Act is not only a crypto bill, it is a structural filter. It decides which companies are serious enough to operate in the next decade and which ones are not. It separates licensed infrastructure from risky gray area businesses. It separates builders with legal protection from developers who are forced to leave. It separates real institutional adoption from speculation. This is why XRP holders should not only watch price candles. Price is emotional, but structure is permanent. A market can stay quiet for months, and then one regulatory change can completely shift the way institutions participate. That is why smart investors watch the plumbing before they watch the fireworks. Now, let's be honest. Many holders are frustrated. XRP has gone through long periods of sideways action. The headlines repeat. The legal and political process feels slow. People around you may not understand why you are still paying attention. But the important question is not whether the price moved today. The question is whether the infrastructure behind the asset is becoming more relevant in a regulated world. If the answer is yes, then the delay does not automatically destroy the thesis. It simply tests patience. The strongest markets are not built during hype. They are built quietly, while most people are distracted, bored, or convinced nothing is happening. Europe's coming shakeout is a warning to the entire industry. The companies that ignored compliance are now under pressure. The companies that prepared early may gain market share. If the United States passes a strong version of the Clarity Act, the same thing could happen here. Weak players could get pushed out, while compliant platforms and serious infrastructure providers become more important. If the United States gets the language wrong, especially around Section 604, then builders may leave, and America could lose leadership in digital finance. Either way, the market is moving towards structure. The only question is whether the United States leads that structure or follows behind other regions. So, when you hear that the odds have dropped to 50% or 44%, do not only see fear. See the pressure point. The market is telling you the bill is not guaranteed. The politics are telling you the vote count is difficult. Europe is telling you what happens when rules finally arrive. And Section 604 is telling you that the future of crypto development may depend on a few lines of legal language. This is why they hid the most important part in the details. The real nuke is not just the headline. It is the realization that regulatory clarity will not save everyone. It will expose who was ready and who was pretending. For XRP holders, the next few weeks are critical because the timeline is now compressed. The Senate returns on July 13th. The defense bill may come first. The ethics framework still needs a deal. Law enforcement still wants changes. Developer protections still need to survive. And the broader market is watching to see whether America finally moves after years of uncertainty. If the Clarity Act advances, it could become one of the biggest regulatory moments in digital asset history. If it stalls, the rest of the world keeps moving anyway. Either way, the global shift toward regulated crypto infrastructure is already underway. So here is the final thought. The Clarity Act is not just about XRP pumping tomorrow. It is about whether digital assets get a clear legal foundation in the largest financial market in the world. It is about whether developers stay or leave. It is about whether institutions step in with confidence or keep waiting. And it is about whether compliant infrastructure finally gets separated from the noise. If this video helped you understand what is really happening, hit the like button, subscribe to the Crypto Intellect, and share this with someone who is only watching price and missing the bigger story. Stay informed, stay patient, and stay focused, because the people who understand the structure early are usually the ones who recognize the shift before the crowd sees it.